Salam sejahtera, anda sedang menonton Agenda AWANI bersama saya, Cynthia Ng. Hari ini kita akan mendalami topik industri 4.0 atau 4IR. Tidak dinafikan bahawa teknologi 4IR ini telah membawa kemajuan yang amat besar sekali kepada ekonomi sedunia. Namun, teknologi ini juga berisiko untuk melebarkan jurang sosial antara negara yang maju dan juga negara yang masih membangun kerana ketidakseimbangan akses kepada teknologi. Dan ini adalah antara perkara yang kami akan bincangkan hari ini. Bersama saya ketika ini di studio ialah pengarah urusan Forum Ekonomi Sedunia, WEF, World Economic Forum. Jeremy Jurgens joins me now. He's the Managing Director of WEF, and he is also the head of the Forum Centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Welcome to the program, Jeremy, and it's a pleasure to have you here in Kuala Lumpur.
Thank you for having me on Astro today.
Well, first of all, I know this is not your first time to Kuala Lumpur, but maybe for the benefit of our audience who may not be aware of what WEF is doing in Malaysia, could you maybe give us a sneak peek into the role that you're doing, and also why specifically Malaysia? Why are you here today?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So at the World Economic Forum, we're working with both government policymakers as well as businesses and NGO leaders and others actually to address the big challenges. And one of our most exciting projects right now is the center we launched here in Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur on the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And we're partnering there to explicitly explore how can we use the new technologies of artificial intelligence, all the new technologies there to actually address both the energy transition as well as improve the digital economy. And this morning I had the chance to actually visit the team there, and it's great to see them running like a startup, getting up to speed very quickly, having launched earlier this year, and had great discussions.
Were you happy with what you've seen at the new 4IR Centre in Malaysia?
I was really impressed. I think the quality of the personnel that were there, and we also had an opportunity to bring together a number of entrepreneurs, startups, also government representatives, and we discussed the startup ecosystem environment, both the strengths that are present here today, but as well as some of the opportunities or challenges that can be addressed, and looking at what we could learn from how it's taken place in other economies and other geographies.
All right. I do want to talk a bit more about the challenges and opportunities, but just to stay on Malaysia for a bit, because Malaysia has the privilege to be home of the 4IR Centre, the only one in the ASEAN region so far. Could you tell us why Malaysia was chosen and the specific opportunities that you're seeing from Malaysia?
Yeah, I think this, idea from the government to say, okay, we want to actually proactively take a lead, and when they approached us about this opportunity, we thought it was a great place to start, and we do look to further expand the network, but being able to start here in Malaysia and support the implementation of the policies and work together with the private sector, we thought was just an excellent opportunity.
Okay, can you share with us a bit maybe about the vision that of this 4IR Centre, and
Yes.
what do you hope to see to come out of this centre?
Yeah, so I think there's two specific areas we're going to focus on. One is in the domain of energy. So if you look at the now National Energy Transition Plan, and I think it has a very ambitious and clear roadmap going forward. So how can we use actually digital technologies to support this? Growing the increase in use of renewable energy, but also on the hydrogen, and supporting the transition of the hydrogen economy there. So this takes advantage of a number of new technologies and new opportunities there. So we'll be connecting in with our global network in that domain. So that's one clear area. Second area is if you look at the digitization of the economy. Here, and I think we'll have a chance to talk more about generative AI, but you look at the role that generative AI will play in supporting employees, labor in their roles, what that means. There will be a study coming out, I believe, later this week, first study already launched by the center, looking explicitly at that. And I think the other element is on inclusion, right? So how do we actually use these tools to make sure that we bring everybody into the economy, and so this isn't just the reserve of some elites or the people that are digitally connected. And the great thing about digital technologies is they can even improve the lives of individuals that don't necessarily have a digital device, depending on how they're used.
Okay, well, those are very, very pertinent topics, which we'll get into a bit more later. Now, you've mentioned energy transition. Of course, it's a very important topic. AI has been touted as a powerful tool to combat climate change and to help transition, into clean energy. I do wonder at WEF, with the bird's eye view of what's going on around the world, could you share maybe some examples of how AI is being used to combat environmental challenges that we are facing today?
Yeah, let me give 2 examples. I think one is just in the utilization of the energy efficiency and in the grid. So of course, as you bring more new renewables into the system, there's time that the sun is shining or the wind is there. And so how do you actually bring all these variables together to make sure that there's a consistent supply of energy to the citizens and to industry? Mm-hmm. And so actually using AI models there, you can better optimize the loads, and so you can actually get more energy output with lower use of inputs. I think there's one concrete example. Another example here would be utilization. Google recently launched new software that can improve the flight paths of planes, both the takeoff speed, the elevation that will do there. That will reduce the use of fuel, which will both save cost but also reduce CO2 emissions. And these kinds of examples can be replicated across any number of areas. Previously, you would have needed a supercomputer to be able to calculate those types of efficiency gains, and today it's something that you could do on a laptop or even potentially a portable device.
So the barriers to us utilizing these technologies have lowered significantly, as well as the cost. I do want to talk about, earlier you mentioned about having AI accessible and the technologies. Equality is what I'm trying to get at, because there is fear that with AI, it might exacerbate the inequality in the world, whereby different countries have different technological advancements. So I do wonder your thoughts on that, and what is WEF doing to try to mitigate those disparities that could exacerbate due to the gap that we're seeing in access to technology?
Yeah, so when we look at a technology, and it doesn't matter whether it's AI, synthetic biology, space technologies, etc. Any technology, we look at 3 specific areas. One is around the governance. What are the policies you need to support that technology? Second is around the applications. How can the technology be used effectively? And the third is, how is the technology used to be inclusive? And we think it's important to look at all 3 of those. If you look at only the application side without the aspect of inclusion, you risk to exacerbate some of these divides that are there. If you use technology without governance, you actually risk that corporate actors can actually abuse that and not necessarily respect the privacy or safety of the citizens. And so that's an important other element there. And the focus on the application side is not everyone is necessarily aware of all the opportunities that it brings. By being able to showcase these applications, it gives the ideas to others how they can fully harness that to improve.
Now, if I can just go a bit further to get some examples of you, because when we talk about, we often hear like big breakthroughs in technology, but sometimes it's usually the smaller, incremental technical advancements that really impact our daily lives, right? So I do wonder, where regions have limited access to advanced technology, have you seen examples of how AI-driven, scalable, and cost-effective solutions that have truly impacted communities?
Yeah, I can share a couple examples. Let me give you 2. One example is in Rwanda, where we've actually worked with the Rwandan government and the Center and Fourth Industrial Revolution there to look at how we can use healthcare supported by AI. Now, in Rwanda's case, many of their trained medical personnel ended up then traveling to Western countries that paid much higher salaries, and so they had a shortage of personnel. Now, here we had 2 specific areas we focused on. One was the use of a AI assistant that when someone comes into a room, and they basically can get interviewed by a non-trained medical staff to decide how urgent their case is. And this allowed them to allocate the services to those individuals that need it most, and when did a doctor need to be called versus when they could be supported by a more junior staff member. A second example was in radiology. Now, with a population of over 10 million people in Rwanda, there's only roughly a dozen radiologists. So it's not a choice of whether you have an AI-generated radiology scan or a human-generated scan. There actually aren't enough radiologists to cover it. So then when you're using an AI radiology scan, you need to understand better, okay, well, where is that data stored? How is it processed? How much does the patient need to know? So we had explicit discussions with medical personnel, with patients, with the health ministry, and using these to actually improve and use the actually AI applications to the benefit of the Rwandan citizens.
Yeah, that's wonderful examples. But I do also want to talk about the digital divide that is still
Yes.
quite widespread, right? So in places that you have access to internet, great, you can run those technologies, but over half of the global population still lack access to high-speed broadband. And for 4IR, we talk about automation, IoT, machine learning, big data. This requires connectivity. And so what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So, policy matters. We're not in a situation that we should just allow technology, whatever happens, happens, and then let's adapt. I think here the policy is extremely important so that we aren't actually forced in a situation where the companies control everything and the citizen doesn't do there. And there can also be the states where the state overuses the technology and it's not necessarily the benefit of the citizen. So this requires a public and informed discussion around those topics. But let me give another concrete example on bridging the digital divide. We've done work in India on what we call AI for agriculture innovation. And we started out piloting first in a few small farms, then expanding that to over 200,000 farmers in one state in Telangana, India. And now it's being scaled up further on. And what we saw is not every farmer necessarily had access to a digital device. So what we did is we worked through farmers' cooperatives to actually bring in the skills, the knowledge, the technology. And one specific example here was creating an agricultural exchange that helped the farmers better understand where their, in this case, chili peppers could get the best prices. And we're actually able to increase the value return to the farmer by 17% by using this shared exchange. Now, as the farmer then has a higher income, then they're actually able to afford that device and then access to a lot of those services directly. And we see a number of cases like this that then improves agricultural yields, reduces the use of water, decreases the time to market. All of these that end up with a healthier, more efficient food supply and actually a better lifestyle for the farmer as well.
Well, certainly food security is, of course, a big challenge, especially with the extreme climate that we are facing now. I just wanted to get your thoughts about your role looking over so many different areas. Now, what are you most excited about when you talk about 4IR and the next generation of technology? What do you think would be a game changer?
Yeah, so personally, I actually think it is most excited these elements that touch people's daily lives, even their analog lives. It's not so much what happens in the digital world. That's interesting for entertainment, for sharing news and information, but it's also how we can use it to improve our digital lives. So we talked about earlier about healthcare, we talked about agriculture, but you can also think about applications in education and the ability to scale and have more personalized education services. When we talk about climate, you actually see the ability to use crops to improve soil nutrition, and then you can actually do carbon fixation. So we can actually start to capture some of the carbon in the scale through computing processes that help us better understand the chemical reactions that take place between the soil, the plants, and the air. And those types of advances weren't necessarily easily discoverable before. And what we see is an acceleration in the speed with which those learnings can both be identified, introduced, and then shared across large audiences. So this ability of the fourth industrial revolution to improve the quality of our daily analog lives is probably what excites me the most.
Now, when we talk about 4IR automation, one of the key concerns, of course, is the potential displacement of workers, right? I mean, depending on which data you get, some say like you could maybe 100 million jobs could be lost in
Yes.
this number of years. But of course, with job losses, there will be new jobs created as well. I do want to get your thoughts about looming threat to jobs as automation and robotics start to impact especially the lower and mid-skilled positions, especially for developing countries such as Malaysia. That is a constant conversation about job displacement by new technologies.
Yeah. So this is a very complex issue, and you have to look at it through different aspects. So one of those elements is whether you're looking to use technology to displace labor or to augment and amplify existing capabilities. If you're a very high-income country with an aging population, limited workforce, then using labor or using technology to displace labor can make sense. On the other hand, if you have a younger population, maybe middle or lower income country, it's much more important to be conscious of how you use technology to augment and support the labor. So again, with these examples we saw in India, we actually see that there's actually cases of labor shortages in agriculture. And I see even in Malaysia, there's labor imported, or say, coming in from Nepal, from Bangladesh, from other countries to support that. Now, another way to do that is saying, okay, well, how can we actually support the Malaysian farmers with some of these tools to actually address those shortages here in Malaysia, but also create opportunities for those individuals in Bangladesh, in Nepal, so they don't feel the need to travel and leave their homes to find employment. So you can actually have the benefit on both sides of that, but only if there's a conscious decision in how you introduce the technology. And I think this is why the dialogues do become important.
Yeah, and with that, I do want to get about the dialogue that you're having at WEF with the public and private sector, because the concern, when you talk about conscious decision, is the concern of a sort of a winner-take-all economy, which is where high-skilled workers are rewarded with high pay, and the workers, low-paying workers, are left behind because of lack of access to technology. So, what is the conversation at WEF right now?
Yeah, so it's quite rich and robust. In April, we brought together 100 top AI researchers to debate these topics. And on one end, there's a concern that there will be killer robots and the world could end, any time from a general AI. And on the other side, there's people saying there's immediate real-world challenges we haven't addressed today. Where we ended up with was actually a set of 30 principles, and you can find those on our website under Presidio Principles, that we actually looked in saying, okay, how do we be conscious of the guardrails that need to be put in place, that the AI technology isn't abused, but also that we also recognize the respect the dignity of individual citizens and look for their individual safety, and recognize that a lot of the challenges today were pre-existing. If you think of some of the harms on cybersecurity, digital safety for children, or vulnerable populations, those existed previously, and now they're just exacerbated by the AI. So we need to actually go and address some of those fundamental challenges. We also see the role of governance. What's applicable in Rwanda, which I mentioned, or in India or the United States, will be different from Malaysia or Indonesia or Singapore. So each country also needs to look at their unique situation and adapt that to their own kind of governance models. And I think the last area is in making sure we focus as much on the opportunities as we do the risks. We don't want to ignore either side of it, because the risk is say, oh, well, we won't use any of it at all because there's a risk associated with it. That would also then mean foregoing many of the benefits that can be brought along.
No, speaking about regulation, I think a lot of governments and even organizations are grappling, with how to deal with emerging tech. For instance, when ChatGPT came online, there was so much buzz about ChatGPT and the potential of job displacement, and going back to that, and also how it might change how we work. Going back to regulation, do you believe that there should be global regulations in place for the development and the use of technology like artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning? Do you think there should be organization overlooking such developments?
Yeah, I think what we want to do is actually manage and regulate for the risks, not necessarily for the technology.
Okay.
If you focus on regulating the technology, Someone then invites a slight variant on the technology and the regulations out of place. We recently saw this with some of the EU regulations that were introduced on AI.
Yes.
They were developed prior to ChatGPT being released and then quickly overtaken. So there will always be this challenge that policymakers won't be able to keep up with the speed of the technology innovation. So here it's actually much more important to say, well, what are the risks that we want to mitigate with? How do we hold accountability with the technology manufacturers, users that have those, rather than trying to regulate the technology directly?
And what are those key risks that you've mentioned that maybe you personally feel like that we should be paying attention to right now?
I think one of the fundamental ones is just being conscious of what I call cyber hygiene.
Okay.
So actually we're all much more vulnerable because the ability to distinguish between a human online, that calls you by phone or on video, becomes more and more difficult. And so actually just making sure that you understand how your data is used, what's used, and that you have mechanisms in place to check. One area that we've seen is actually abuse of people using automated calling systems to call old people who don't necessarily have the training and be able to differentiate these elements. And now with the ability to take someone's voice, copy it, record it, and play it there, that introduces some risk. So I think cyber hygiene is one of the key areas that I'd focus on. I think the second is to actually have an active discussion, whether that's in the workplace or in the family, around how it's used, how it works. So just an better understanding of the technologies, I think, will reduce some of the fear, help manage the risks, but also make sure that we can unlock the opportunities there.
Okay. Now, just a couple of minutes that we have left. Given the diverse levels of technological developments across countries, now how can you bridge these gaps and find a common ground when we talk about putting in place guardrails and principles? What is the conversation that you're having with policymakers?
Yeah. So a lot of the questions first start around data. Where's the data hosted? How is it sourced?
Yeah.
What are the biases that might be in place already when the data was trained? One of the weaknesses is many current models is the copyright regulations were unclear.
Yes.
And where the data was used. Additionally, sometimes when individuals put the data into the system, they don't necessarily know that it then goes in and they no longer have control on that. I think so bringing in more visibility on how the data is stored, used, where it stays is really important. I think this is especially smaller in countries that are leveraging technology services that are provided by larger countries where there may be an imbalance in the level of knowledge. And so having explicit conversations about that, both at the individual level, but also among the policymakers. Not every policymaker necessarily has actually opened up ChatGPT or tried it yet. So helping improve the education there for decision makers is also important.
I think this also relates going back to data security, because a lot of our data are being shared online with platforms that may be thousands of miles away. And how is WEF looking at data privacy with the advent of 4IR, and that more data will be put in the cloud and will be used to generate insights for organizations, businesses?
Yeah, so I think this is an area where it's really important to have a explicit discussion among companies, but as well with policymakers. If the policymakers try to do it without the companies, they basically don't necessarily understand the technologies. And if the companies do it without the policymakers, they may not put in sufficient restrictions. So actually by bringing the groups together, it's really important. A good example here is what we've done is looking at the use of advanced manufacturing technologies in factories to improve the efficiency in manufacturing. We actually brought in labor unions. And so we actually brought in labor union representatives. We did tours of factory floors, interviewed workers to actually help senior executives understand what the perception was from the worker and also helping the worker understand what the competitive pressures were there. So those kind of shared discussions are really important.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, for sharing some of the work that you do and also your insights about 4IR. Thank you so much, and best of luck with what you're doing at WA.
Thank you.
Thank you.